a system message suddenly appeared, stark and urgent. It announced that the main quest had been renewed, warning that the villain was trying to capture Dowd. The message instructed him to skillfully overcome this ordeal, emphasizing that the faster he resolved it, the better the reward would be. The reward promised was a branch benefit from the main scenario. Dowd, however, wasn't impressed. He thought to himself that the man before him, Marquis Riverback, also known as the Purifier, was nothing special. To Dowd, Marquis Riverback was nothing more than a puppet, a clever but insignificant figure, unworthy of being a Chapter 1 boss, despite his status as a Viscount. Marquis Riverback was a successful transport businessman and a famous philanthropist, running a charity foundation well known even within the Empire. Their slogan was about giving opportunities to talented individuals who couldn't develop their potential due to unfavorable circumstances. Dowd acknowledged that Riverback was very articulate in this regard, but he also knew the truth behind the facade. In reality, Riverback's philanthropy was just a front. He built trust with the people, only to slowly manipulate them into obeying his every word, a process that often led to their deaths. Dowd discreetly glanced at the tattoos on the necks of the men accompanying Riverback, the seal of the Purifiers, a group of devil worshippers. Dowd wondered if this was one of the factions he had heard about. The Purifiers were obsessed with the Tristan family, believing that a devil resided in their bloodline. They were aware to some extent that the resurrection of the Grey Devil was tied to this lineage. When Marquis Riverback greeted Princess Tristan with a smile, Dowd noticed how Elnor's expression hardened further. It was clear that they weren't on good terms. Riverback then casually mentioned that he would borrow Dowd for a moment, prompting Elnor to protest. However, Dowd leaned closer and whispered to her, assuring her that it would be fine and that it wouldn't take long. Elnor reluctantly relented. Though she seemed uneasy, Dowd thought to himself that the situation would be over soon. In fact, it might already be over. Marquis Riverback, observing Dowd's calm demeanor, remarked on his apparent closeness to Princess Tristan. Dowd responded casually, asking if there was any problem with that, as he began eating from the tray in front of him. Riverback, however, was unimpressed. He had heard reports of Dowd's strange closeness to the hero candidate and Princess Tristan, expecting someone extraordinary. Yet, the man before him seemed disappointingly ordinary. Riverback's thoughts turned to the Prophet, the revered leader of the devil worshippers. The Prophet was a being of immense power and influence, and all devil worshippers, including the Purifiers, were mere tools to him. Riverback owed his position as a Viscount and his reputation as a prominent businessman entirely to the Prophet's favor. Compared to the Prophet, Riverback felt like nothing but a bug. Yet, the Prophet was interested in Dowd, a seemingly insignificant man. Riverback didn't understand why, but he knew his original plan to approach the hero candidate had shifted to Dowd because of the Prophet's interest. Riverback asked Dowd if he knew why he had been called there. His goal was to manipulate Dowd into cooperating, or blackmail him if necessary. Riverback thought to himself that things were going perfectly. Dowd had unwittingly delivered their main target, Princess Tristan, to their doorstep. With the full moon festival in full swing, security was at its weakest. Riverback believed that the grace of God would descend upon heaven and earth. Devil energy thrived on chaos and fear, and if blood and death drowned the festival, the slumbering devil within Princess Tristan would awaken. The Prophet had declared the Tristan family's lineage as tied to the devil, and after years of preparation, the moment had finally arrived. Riverback was confident that the plan was perfect, with no room for error. As for Dowd, if he refused to comply, death would be his only option. His relationship with Princess Tristan made him a useful pawn, though Riverback privately thought of him as nothing more than a dung beetle rolling around in manure. Lost in his thoughts, Riverback was startled when Dowd, mid-bite, turned to him with a blank stare and simply asked, "What?" Hearing Dowd's relaxed tone, Marquis Riverback sighed inwardly, feeling the situation was utterly ridiculous. He couldn't understand why the Prophet had insisted on meeting this man. Suppressing his frustration, he pressed on, asking Dowd if he knew why he had been called there. Dowd responded casually, almost as if he were discussing the weather. He suggested that Riverback was probably going to talk about resurrecting the devil or something along those lines. The Marquis was caught off guard, holding his breath at Dowd's bluntness. Dowd continued, casually, listing out details of Riverback's plan as if he had read his mind. He pointed out that the full moon festival was the perfect time to strike, as security was at its weakest. He mentioned how Riverback, with his transportation business, could easily smuggle monsters into the Golden Triangle disguised as goods. Dowd even revealed that Riverback had planted bombs around the city to create chaos, unleashing the monsters while the knights were distracted by assassins. Dowd explained that the earlier assassination attempts on Princess Tristan and the monster stampede at the welcome party were just tests to see if the basic conditions for the plan were met. He spoke so casually, as if he were chatting over a meal, even pausing to compliment the sauce on his food. Marquis Riverback was stunned. His carefully crafted plan, known only to him and the Prophet, had been laid bare in seconds by the man he had dismissed as a fool. Dowd smirked, seemingly more interested in his meal than the gravity of the situation. Riverback clenched the armrest of his chair, a thick drop of sweat running down his forehead. He demanded to know who Dowd really was, but Dowd brushed off the question, teasing Riverback for pretending to be polite when he was usually reckless and aggressive. Dowd then dropped another bombshell, revealing that he had already taken care of everything. He had reported the plan to the president, who had personally mobilized the knights to counter it. Marquis Riverback gritted his teeth, realizing he had miscalculated. His plan to raise devil worshippers by nurturing the Empire's talents was unraveling before his eyes. He thought to himself that Dowd was a monster, not the kind that burned brightly like the hero candidate or Princess Tristan, but one that was cold and unassuming, like frozen steel. He was the kind of threat you didn't see coming until it was too late. Riverback finally admitted that Dowd was no ordinary person, but he wasn't ready to give up. He pressed a button on his necklace, sending a signal to his men. He confidently declared that not everything was in Dowd's control and that his elite forces were already on their way to subdue Princess Tristan. Dowd, however, remained unfazed. He told Riverback to go ahead and try, revealing that he had brought Elnor there for a reason. Dowd knew that Elnor, despite her mental limitations, was a force to be reckoned with when she unleashed her power. He thought to himself that these so-called elites would make good punching bags for her. In Dowd's mind, Elnor wasn't the one trapped, they were trapped with her. One of the men surrounding Elnor ordered her to stand up, telling her they had somewhere to be. Elnor, instead of complying immediately, furrowed her eyebrows and began a monologue about hope and how it had fooled her many times. Her low-pitched voice echoed in the tense silence, causing the armed men to frown in confusion. Elnor grabbed a nearby wine bottle and drank its contents in one go, an act that seemed out of place for a noblewoman, but somehow fit her current state. It was clear she had been suppressing something for a long time. She muttered about how hope could blind people, but sometimes there were things that didn't betray you. The man, irritated by her behavior, strode toward her, intending to force her to stand. He towered over her, his massive frame making Elnor seem small in comparison. However, the next moment Elnor grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his flesh. Blood gushed as muscles tore and bones shattered under her grip. Before the man could react, she slammed his head onto the table, shattering the wine bottle and scattering glass shards everywhere. The surrounding men drew their swords in fear, but Elnor smirked and casually tossed the unconscious man aside like a crumpled piece of paper. She admitted that she had been holding back lately due to the many eyes on her, but now she was ready to let loose. One of the men shouted that capturing her alive was the top priority, but a second later, he was slammed into the wall by Elnor's fist. She mocked their plan to capture her alive, her red eyes gleaming menacingly. The men, realizing her strength and agility were beyond imagination, took a step back, their confidence wavering. Elnor's thoughts turned to Dowd's words, reminding her that these men were devil worshippers and that holding back would only make things worse. She decided to release her suppressed madness, a method of relief long practiced in the Tristan family. She declared that, in accordance with imperial law, executing devil worshippers on the spot was permissible. A chilling aura descended upon the room as Elnor's blood-red eyes flashed with a fierce gleam. The men, realizing they were facing not just a skilled swordsman but something far more terrifying, felt a sense of foreboding. Elnor warned them to be ready to kill if they wanted to hold out a little longer. Or, what followed was absolute mayhem. Dowd, watching from the top floor, noted that it had taken Elnor only 3 minutes and 30 seconds to reach them. Marquis Riverback, dazed and muttering to himself, seemed unable to comprehend what had just happened. Dowd asked Elnor if she was okay, but she simply tossed aside 2 bloodied bodies and replied that it had been refreshing. Dowd was stunned. Elnor had single-handedly taken down dozens, if not hundreds, of elite troops, all while wearing a one-piece dress and in just a few minutes. He thought to himself that she was a real monster. Dowd thought to himself that the situation was utterly insane. Even with his EX-level desperation stat boost, which should have allowed him to handle 5 to 10 people, facing dozens or even hundreds of elite troops was impossible. Holding out for even a few seconds would be considered a miracle. Marquis Riverback, who had been brimming with confidence just moments ago, was now completely stunned. The elaborate plan he had built over many years was dismantled in mere minutes by one person. As Dowd stood there, speechless, Elnor furrowed her brows as if she had suddenly remembered something. She calmly tossed aside two bloodied corpses and walked toward Dowd, complaining that the situation hadn't been a good idea. She claimed it had been difficult and that she could have been hurt, blaming Dowd for putting her in such a position. Dowd was baffled. Elnor didn't have a single scratch on her. In fact, she looked flawless, like a brand new porcelain doll. He thought to himself that she had clearly enjoyed the fight and relieved all her stress, but she continued to insist that he owed her. Elnor demanded that Dowd make it up to her by going out together again. Dowd, feeling he had no grounds to refuse, reluctantly agreed. Elnor added cryptically that he would have to take responsibility for other things later, leaving Dowd confused about what she meant. As Dowd sighed at her incomprehensible words, a system window suddenly appeared before him. It displayed a message about Elnor's current condition, noting that her favorability was at D or higher, and that her unique debuff, madness, had improved under his influence. The system also announced that an exclusive quest had been triggered, which would unlock a higher favorability level and grant significant benefits to the main scenario. Dowd was surprised to see that the quest involved Elnor's father, Archduke Gideon Tristan, a key figure in the Empire and a major villain in the story. Dowd hadn't expected Gideon to take an interest in him, especially during Chapter 1. He decided to look into it later, as more pressing matters demanded his attention. Another system message appeared, announcing that Dowd had completed the main quest in record time, less than 5 minutes, and would receive the highest level reward. Meanwhile, Marquis Riverback, now mentally crushed, muttered in disbelief about everything he had accomplished being destroyed so quickly. Elnor coldly advised him to surrender, pointing out that his association with devil worshippers would lead to his immediate execution due to the social stigma. Marquis Riverback let out a bitter laugh and revealed a pulsating, wriggling mass resembling a living creature's heart. Dowd immediately recognized it as a cursed item, something that allowed a person to borrow corrupt power for a short time. He urgently told Elnor to cut off Riverback's arm before he could consume it, but it was too late. Marquis Riverback shoved the essence into his mouth, declaring, "Receive the grace of God." In the next moment, the entire Twilight Iris building was consumed by surging darkness.